I know a lot of you love Christmas, and it's like a highlight of your year for you. Thanksgiving in the beach house is the highlight of the year. We love Thanksgiving, and so we don't even talk about Christmas. We don't even acknowledge that there is a Christmas until Thanksgiving has come and gone, and then we turn our attention and our minds to Christmas. And Pastor Keith is the opposite. I think in June he started listening to Christmas music, so I know there's some of you out there that get into the Christmas spirit early, and I've come to peace with that. I'm fine with that. You do it your way, and we're going to do it our way. But we want to think about Thanksgiving a little bit, and I want to just kind of, through Psalm 105, maybe just inform how we celebrate Thanksgiving, and some of what we think about. Kind of want to inspire you about what you think about this week and how you do Thanksgiving as it comes upon us. One of the key verses from 105 that I want to look at to start off is 105 verse 5. 105:5. It says, "Remember the wondrous works that he has done, his miracles and the judgments he uttered." And that key word right there in verse 5, verse 1, or the first word is remember. I think that's such a big part of what Thanksgiving is. We get so busy with the now and all the things that are happening, and then tomorrow and the things that need to happen tomorrow and the weekend and next week and next month, and where am I going to PCS to, and what's my next position going to be, and should I stay in or should I get out? It's like there's always just more in front of us that it really takes some discipline to actually stop moving forward and to look backwards. Because our train just keeps hurtling forward at such a fast pace. And I think Thanksgiving is an opportunity to do that. Thanksgiving is an opportunity to just say, okay, tomorrow, to quote somebody, tomorrow has enough stress of its own. I'm going to think about today, and I'm going to look back and remember the past. So one of the first things that I want to emphasize is to remember God's faithfulness. Thanksgiving is an opportunity for us to remember God's faithfulness. To look back, and instead of just thinking forward and just planning for tomorrow and next year, to look back and remember. It seems like sometimes we have short memories. Do you remember the 10 lepers that were healed? As soon as they were healed, they immediately started planning what's next and where am I going to go, and now I'm healthy, da-da-da-da-da-da. And only 1 out of the 10 actually stopped to say, you know what, I need to give thanks for what's happened to me. I need to go back and remember who did this and how this happened instead of just moving forward with my life now. The next point kind of sounds like the same thing. Remember God's faithfulness. Remind yourself of what God has done. But I wanted to sharpen in on something. Something that I've noticed about myself. When it gets time to be Thanksgiving, and, you know, one of our traditions is we go around the table. I think it's kind of an American tradition. I don't think we have the corner on that one. And we talk about what we're thankful for. And what I find, the temptation for me is because I'm a physical person living with my 5 senses, so often my thanks starts to take on here and now dimensions. And I often forget to even bring God into it. So let me tell you what that looks like. I am so thankful for Duane. She is such an incredible wife. I am so thankful for what she does for me. I'm so thankful for how she raises our children. And all of that is true, but who have I not mentioned in any of that thanks? God. I've not even said his name. I didn't even say I thank God for Duane, which at least is a nod in his direction, and then I can move on to just talking about my wife. And there's nothing wrong with talking about my wife. I do love Duane, and I am so thankful. And there are times, specifically anniversaries, where I remind her of how thankful I am for her, and a few other days too. But Thanksgiving, I think we need to discipline ourselves a little bit to say, I'm not just going to make this about the people in my life. I'm not just going to talk about my wife and my family, and I'm thankful for my job, and I'm thankful for America, and I'm thankful. I think we need to discipline ourselves to say, I'm thankful for God and what God has done. I want to remember what God has done. I want to focus my mind on what God has done. So I want to show this to you in Psalm 105, and it's going to be kind of tedious, but I'm going to ask for your patience, okay? We're going to read 105 together. We've done this with almost all the Psalms that we've worked through, and once again, there's going to be underlined parts, and you're going to say the underlined parts, and I'm going to say the non-underlined parts. And specifically what I'm going to have you say is every time the psalmist mentions what God has done, God's action, I want you to pay attention. Maybe some kids, you can count how many times it says he has, not has, but he verb. You're not going to read he verb either. And hopefully you figured out what I'm talking about. So we're going to read this together. It's a long passage, and so all week I've been debating, do I want to make them stand for 40 verses? And I just decided, yes, I do want to make you stand for 40 verses. So you guys get us started, okay? Let's go.
He is the Lord our God.
His judgments are in all the earth.
He remembers
His covenant forever, the word that
He commanded.
For 1,000 generations, the covenant that
He made.
With Abraham, his sworn promise to Isaac, which
He confirmed.
to Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying, to you
I will give
the land of Canaan as your portion for an inheritance. When they were few in number, of little account, and sojourners in it, wandering from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another people,
He allowed.
no one to oppress them.
He rebuked.
Kings on their account, saying, touch not my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm. When
He summoned.
a famine on the land, and
He broke.
all supply of bread,
He had sent.
a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters, his neck was put in a collar of iron, until what he had said came to pass, the word of
The Lord tested him.
the king sent and released him. The ruler of the people set him free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his possessions, to bind his princes at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom. Then Israel came to Egypt. Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham, and
The Lord made.
his people very fruitful, and
Made.
them stronger than their foes.
He turned.
Their hearts to hate his people, to deal craftily with his servants.
He sent.
Moses, his servant, and Aaron.
Whom he had chosen.
They performed his signs among them, and miracles in the land of Ham.
He sent.
Darkness, and made the land dark. They did not rebel against his words.
He turned.
Their waters into blood, and caused their fish to die. Their land swarmed with frogs, even in the chambers of their kings.
He spoke.
And there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout their country.
He gave.
Them hail for rain, and fiery lightning bolts through their land.
He struck.
Down their vines and fig trees, and shattered the trees of their country.
He spoke.
And the locusts came, young locusts without number, which devoured all the vegetation in their land, and ate up the fruit of their ground.
He struck down.
All the firstborn in their land, the first fruits of all their strength. Then
He brought out.
Israel with silver and gold, and there was none among his tribes who stumbled. Egypt was glad when they departed, for dread of them had fallen upon it.
He spread.
A cloud for a covering, and fire to give light by night. Then they asked, and
He brought.
quail, and
He gave.
then bread from heaven in abundance.
He opened.
The rock, and water gushed out. It flowed through the desert like a river. For
He remembered.
his holy promise, and Abraham his servant. So
He brought.
his people out with joy, his chosen ones with singing, and
He gave.
them the lands of the nations, and they took possession of the fruit of the people's toil, that they might keep his statutes and observe his laws. Praise the Lord. Thank you. You may be seated. Thank you for patronizing me. Who's the star of Psalm 105? Who's the one acting in history? The psalmist makes no mistake, does not allow Abraham or Moses or Joseph or Pharaoh to become the stars of the story. He goes back through history, specifically Israel's history, But as he does so, he mentions Abraham, and he mentions Moses, and he mentions Joseph, and he mentions Pharaoh. But over and over, he says they're living and they're doing things, but God is the one who's working. God did this, and God remembered, and God struck, and God broke, and God brought, and God fed, and God struck the rock. God did all of these things in our history. It is God who's been working. So specifically, I want to challenge you this week. Remember what God has done. Go back through your story. And where has God acted? What has God done in our lives? How has God worked in our past? And then as we remind ourselves of what God has done, the next part, verses 1 through 4, it reminds us and challenges us. Can you go to that JPEG, Seattle? It reminds us to respond to what God has done. We're called to react. We remember, we remind ourselves God was working, God was working, God was working, God was working. What do you do when you see how much God is working? Look at these first 4 verses of Psalm 105. Oh, give thanks to the Lord. Call upon his name. Make known his deeds among the peoples. Sing to him. Sing praises to him. Tell of all his wondrous works. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his presence continually. Psalm 105, 1-4, ought to be our marching orders for the next 5 days. As we go into and look forward to Thanksgiving. And if you're traveling, have a great trip. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy the people you're traveling with. And as you travel, one of the things about traveling is you spend a lot of time traveling. You're in a car, you're in a airplane, you're in a train, you're sitting. This is 4 verses. Give thanks to the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the peoples. Some of you are going to go to other nations and other countries. Make known the deeds, the works of God among the nations. Sing to him. Now, some people might think you're weird if you're singing in the airport or singing in the airplane. Maybe sing softly to him. Tell of all his wondrous works. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice in what the Lord has done. We have an opportunity as a nation. We have set aside a day in a secular nation to say we're going to give thanks. And usually we just stop there, but originally the object of our thanks was very clear, that we're going to give thanks to God. So there's a lot of times that your private religious beliefs are kind of like, yeah, just keep them to yourself. But we have an excuse this week. We have a national permission to tell people about what God has done in our lives. Use it. Don't be obnoxious about it. And don't be, I guess obnoxious is the best word. It's not about, haha, I'm going to shove this down your throat now because it's Thanksgiving. But people are ready to hear you give thanks this week. They know that that's what this is about. They know that that's what this holiday is about. So give thanks to God. Tell people about what God has done. Tell of all his wondrous works. Give thanks to the Lord. Make known his deeds among the peoples. Sing to him. Sing praises to him. Glory in his holy name. Let the heart of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his presence continually. If you do those things, you will be celebrating Thanksgiving. You could skip the turkey and do these things and still celebrate Thanksgiving, because this is the heart of it. This is what it's really about. Football is fun and great. Cranberries, not my favorite, but some people really like them. This is what Thanksgiving is at. This is what it means to have Thanksgiving. So part of what I wanted to do is I was thinking about what God has done. A lot of you come and go at High Point, and this is a part of your life for a couple of years. And it's been neat. High Point has been a part of my life since 1977, when I was born. I was born into the High Point family. And off and on in different ways, it's been part of my life. And in 2013, we celebrated 20 years of being here in Vilsec. And so we put together a little video of what God has done over the 20 years. So this is 3 years old. And God's continued to do things since 2013. But I thought instead of trying to tell you about what God has done, I want to just watch this video again and celebrate what God has done specifically here in this place at this church. It's neat to think back what God has done for 23 years here in Vilsec. And let's see, 93, 77 and 93, so 16 years down in Ulm. God has worked in many different ways. God has brought a lot of people. You know what I noticed as we put that video together? We didn't highlight a lot of the difficult and bad times that High Point has been through. We didn't talk about the hard times. And we have a tendency to do that sometimes. When we remember what God has done, we think it's impolite to bring up some of the difficult things that God has done. Did you notice that about Psalm 105? Did you notice some of the things that David remembered that God had done? If you're in Psalm 105, turn back to that. Verse 12, he says, when they were few in number, of little account, and sojourners in it, wandering from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another people. So he remembered that they started young. Seattle, can you put up the next point and go back to the PowerPoint for me? He starts and says, when they were few in number, of little account, and sojourners in it. And then look at verse 16. When he, meaning God, summoned a what? The ESV says, when he summoned a famine on the land. And when he, God, broke the supply of bread. That's one of the things that God did in Israel's past. As the psalmist looks back and says, let's remember what God has done. One of the things he says is, God brought a famine on us. And God broke our supply of bread. And God forced Israel to go down into Egypt. Later on then it says, verse 18, Joseph's feet were hurt with fetters. His neck was put in a collar of iron until what he had said came to pass. The word of the Lord tested him. How did he test him? He tested him through slavery. He tested him through prison. He tested him through false accusations. So a lot of times when we think we need to remember what God has done, we kind of tell ourselves we've got to remember all of the good things that God has done. And yet there's this interesting pattern that as well as the good things and as well as the deliverance and as well as the victory, the psalmist points out God sent a famine. God broke our supply of bread. God put Joseph in prison. God allowed Joseph to go into slavery. Then down in verse 25, God turned their hearts to hate his own people. I'm not even sure I've got a theology to explain that. But as the psalmist is remembering what God has done, he specifically goes out of his way to remember the valleys as well as the mountaintops. And sometimes, maybe not sometimes, I don't remember the last Thanksgiving where someone said, you know what, I remember God putting me through a really difficult time. I have to take that back. This coming Sunday, we're going to do what we're talking about. So we're going to have a single service. No 9, no 11:30. We're going to have one service at 10:30. And I'm not going to prepare a sermon. We're going to have a Sunday of Thanksgiving, which we've done for 4 or 5 years. It's become one of my favorite Sundays because we get to hear from each other of what God has done. Looking back, what has God done in your life? And I do remember people who have gotten up and have said, God has put me through difficult times. God has tested me. God has tried me. And like the psalmist saying, not only did God deliver me and not only did God save me, but God also brought a famine in my life. God also proverbially put me in prison, proverbially put me through testing and suffering. We need to remember the valleys. It is in the valleys that God shapes us and develops us. It is the difficult times. We were just talking to a young couple this week going through a struggle, and Daylin and I said, you know what? This is not a fun time in marriage, but I'm telling you, this time in marriage is going to make your marriage so much stronger than the trips and the vacations and the holidays and the fun things we put on Facebook. Those do not make strong marriages. Because I can have fun on vacation with just about any of you in this room. I mean, vacation, if you can't enjoy a vacation, there's something wrong with you. But it's the people that we can go through hard times with. And it's when Daylin and I can work through a really difficult challenge in our marriage and get out the other side of it, that we come out stronger. We come out closer. We come out with a better marriage than we went in with. And it's the valleys often that we don't want to remember, that we want to just think about, well, God was good to me here, and God gave me this great time, and God blessed me here. But sometimes it's the difficult times, it's the famines that God sends, and it's the imprisonment and the slavery that God shapes us the most through. So the psalmist doesn't avoid that part of Israel's past. The oppression, the slavery, the imprisonment, the hatred that they experienced. Can I just say for a minute, we're in this volatile time as a country, and it's just gotten more volatile and more volatile. And as I thought through Israel's history, it really reminds me of the history of the African American community in America. I mean, you just think through some of the words I just used: oppression, slavery, imprisonment, prejudice, hatred. The African American community has experienced a lot of that. And you look at some of the spiritual core that's in the African American community, we could learn and should learn a lot from them. What they've learned through suffering, what they've experienced, and how they know God in a different way than some of us who haven't lived, don't have a history of suffering. Israel didn't deny or didn't try to escape or didn't try to cover over the difficult times that God brought them through. They said, yep, God blessed us and God gave us land, but God also gave us famines. God also put us in slavery. God also put us in prison. So remember the valleys. You can't have mountains without valleys. I think that's true. I'm not a geologist. Yeah, obviously, I don't even know what I'm not. But if you have mountains, that means in between the mountains are what? It's kind of unavoidable. Because if you raise the valleys up, what do you do to the mountains? They're not there anymore. It's just a plateau. So don't look at me like that, Eric. This makes sense. This is logical. Eric's the one I can count on to call me on things when I'm getting off. I think this works. You can't have mountains without valleys. And spiritually, I think there's a correspondence there. I think what makes good times really good is that we also go through bad times. And I think the difficult times are needed and necessary. We often say God allows them in our life. But the psalmist goes further than that. The psalmist doesn't say God allowed a famine. The psalmist doesn't say God allowed the bread to run out. He said he summoned a famine and he broke the bread. He said he turned the people's hearts of Egypt against them. The psalmist sees God actively not only in the good parts of their past, but also in the hard parts and in the rough parts of their past. God was with us in the past, and he is with us now. It's important that we remember that God has brought us through valleys. If you look back and only remember the good times, then as you go through a valley, you don't have this theology that says, yes, valleys are part of a spiritual Christian walk. That God walks through the valleys with us. There's a reason, as cliche and corny and overdone as it is, there's a reason the Footprints poem is so popular. Because that concept that God does not leave us in the valleys, God does not leave us in the hard times, but he is with us and carries us through the hard times, is powerful, is true. We know it, we experience it. So it's important to remember the valleys in our life. It's important to talk about them. Even this week of Thanksgiving, to bring up to our families, these are some of the hard times that I've gone through. This is some of the things I've learned through the hard times I've gone through. And then the very last verse, verse 45, it says, so he brought his people out with joy. And there's a beautiful balance there. He talks about the slavery, he talks about the Egyptians hating and God turning their hearts to hate his people. But then he also talks about he brought them out, he delivered them. He saved them. He brought his people out with joy in verse 43, his chosen ones with singing, and he gave them the lands of the nations, and they took possession of the fruit of the people's toil. And then verse 45 gives us a purpose statement. You know what a purpose statement is? Why? What did God want them to do when he brought them out? Why did God deliver them? Why did God save them? Verse 45 says, that they might keep his statutes and observe his laws. He redeemed Israel to create a special people for himself. A people who are zealous for good works. Not just zealous for nationalism, but zealous for good works, zealous to obey, zealous to do what God has commanded them to do. So we need to remember what God has done. In the midst of that, we need to do what God has done that hasn't been fun. We need to remember the valleys. But as we look towards the future, we need to remember to obey. That super simple song that your children hopefully have learned, and if not, you could teach it to them this week. Trust and obey. I won't sing anymore. That's enough. I think we've got it, right? This basic premise of Christianity is trusting God and obeying God. You can go all the way back to Abraham, trusting God, obeying God. What were Adam and Eve supposed to do? Trust God, obey God. What did God want his people to do? Trust God, obey God. What are we called in the New Testament to do? Trust God, obey God. I was reminded, I don't know if you're doing the readings with us as a church. We're trying to finish up a couple of books, so we're doing a lot in Isaiah. And just this week, I read Isaiah chapter 48, verses 17 to 19. And after I read, I try to write down a couple of verses from the chapter that I think are significant or that I can get something from. And these are the verses that I wrote down, I think it was Tuesday. Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel. I am the Lord your God. Look at what kind of a God Israel had and we have. I am the Lord your God who teaches you to profit, who leads you in the way you should go. So what is God saying to his people? I am a God who wants to bless you. I want to take you to mountaintops. I want to give you good things. I want to be the God who blesses you. And in order to bless you, I teach you to profit. I give you laws and I give you rules that are going to be good for you, that are going to make you and shape you and turn you into this wonderful people. I lead you in the way you should go. I give you commands and say, this is how you should live. These are the paths you should take. And then look what he says. He says, I am the Lord your God who teaches you to profit, who leads you in the way you should go. Oh, that you paid attention to my commandments. Can you identify with that? If God changed it and that says, thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, the Holy One of High Point. I am the Lord your God who teaches you to profit and leads you in the way you should go. Would he say to us as a people, oh, that you had paid attention to my commandments. I wish you would just do what I told you to do because I want to do good for you. I've given you laws that will bless you. I've given you commands that will make your life so much easier. Oh, that you paid attention to my commandments. Then your peace would have been like a river, and your righteousness like the waves of the sea. Your offspring would have been like the sand, and your descendants like its grains. Their name would never be cut off or destroyed from before me. You see the heart of God? The heart of God is, I want to bless you. I want you to profit. I want your descendants to do well. I want to give you mountaintop experiences. But you have to obey. There's laws and there's commands that I've given. And if you disregard them and you ignore them, it's not going to go well for you. You're not going to see my blessings. So Isaiah 48, 17 to 19 reminds us that God is working for our profit if only we would pay attention to his commandments. God is working for our profit if only we would pay attention to his commandments. One of the songs we sang this morning is, He works all things together for my good. Remember that bridge that we sang? Is that the exact word? You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. When we obey, he doesn't have to discipline us as much. Parents, does that sound familiar? Our hearts are to spoil our kids. Our hearts are to give them. But when you give, and they disobey, you can't keep giving. It doesn't help them. It's not good for them. And when God works all things together for our good, sometimes that means he disciplines us. He spanks us. I'm sorry if that offends you. That's what Hebrews 12 says. It says he physically disciplines us. All right, I think I've said enough. Remember to obey. I think this is, I want to just give you the kind of this summary as we go into a week of Thanksgiving. I will remember God's faithfulness in the past. I will trust his wisdom in the present. And I will walk obediently into the future. Can we, would you say that with me? I'm not sure if you're ready to commit to that. Whether you're ready to or not, I'd love if you would say it, even if you're not going to do it. If you would, can we say that together as a church? I will remember God's faithfulness in the past. I will trust his wisdom in the present. I will walk obediently into the future. Pray with me, please.